Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 22nd of April 2025. Just before we get started, I want to remind you that we're doing a campaign fundraiser for Car for Ukraine. We've just overtaken at ATP Geopolitics, Silicon Curtain here. And I'd love us to move up the leaderboard to get into the top 5 if at all possible. We are playing catch up because we started a bit later. I went away for a week when this all started and everyone got going, and I was a bit behind the curve there. But we are catching up. Please, if you do have some spare wherewithal means to contribute to this campaign, go to atpgeo.com/donate, link in the description below, and it should take you straight to the ATP Geopolitics. Make sure you do go to the ATP Geopolitics page here and register your donation through that one so that it registers against the channel, and then hopefully we can achieve our goal. Okay, going on to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find those in the description to the video below. We have 1,130 personnel lost, so that's back over 1,000 as a result of the truce ending. We have 4 tanks, lower than the daily average, as you might expect. 19 troop-carrying AFVs, that's just below the daily average, and 26 artillery systems, a snip above the daily average. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, good news there, and 134 vehicles and fuel tanks is a pretty high number, as we've been used to, we've come to expect. Now, let's talk about personnel losses. Max 24 reports, well, in fact, the authorized representative for missing persons, Zaporizhzhia, has stated that there are about 63,000 missing persons in Ukraine. So as soon as I hear that, I think, well, that's mainly going to be soldiers. But actually, there's a large proportion that are people who are being filtered through into Russia through the filtration camps, essentially kidnapped children and adults alike. There is confirmation that more than 10,000 of those 63,000 are in captivity in Russia. The search continues constantly, but the scale is colossal. That might also include people who have done a runner from mobilization and have skipped abroad. It could be all sorts of people feeding into that number, but it will also be missing in action, I would have thought, in Ukraine as well. Now, more captured POWs, this time in Kupiansk area. On behalf of the Ukrainians, they've captured some Russians. That's always good to know, because it means that in some areas the Ukrainians are certainly on the offensive. As I keep saying, you generally only capture people when you are attacking rather than defending. Now, the airview sniper Osman has reported, and this happened yesterday morning. Well, this is yesterday afternoon it came out, but I think it's probably referring to the period where there was a truce. I'm not sure 100%. No, AFU sniper Osman reports since last night the enemy has been relentlessly assaulting. Actually, no, it probably is after the truce ended. Relentlessly assaulting our positions near the Dnipropetrovsk border with both infantry and armor. At least 4 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed, countless vehicles and bikes. After 3 days of build-up, their stormtroopers are now dying in tree lines. This is a fairly critical statement of the Russian situation. And in fact, we then come to this pretty incredible assault that took place. We have video from sort of 2 angles of this. So first, it was reported by Null Reports and many others that a massive Russian assault in the Zaporizhzhia axis was crushed by the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. So really emotive language here, I think, reflecting that it was pretty disastrous for the Russians. Over 300 troops and 40 plus vehicles, including tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, advanced but were spotted early by Ukrainian drones. 29 enemy vehicles and around 140 troops were destroyed. Wow. So really, high numbers of losses for the Russians here. Then he said later, new footage from the large Zaporizhzhia assault shows how GUR's Artan unit alongside other units crushed the Russian breakthrough attempt. 300 plus troops, 40 armoured vehicles and tanks were stopped cold. First BMPs taken out were 8 kilometres before the contact line. This is what we've been talking about. The reason I'm including this is it goes a long way to support all the claims recently that we've heard. Chasiv Yar, down in Andriivka, this time in Zaporizhzhia, that the Russians are getting destroyed far, far from the contact line. So 8 kilometers from where they were going to fight, the first BMPs were taken out here. Over 15 vehicles and around 100 troops are neutralized, which is, I guess, down from what they're saying originally, 29 enemy vehicles and 140 troops destroyed. But either way, just vast numbers of personnel and equipment destroyed. I don't know if that means over 15 vehicles in that bit of footage shown to be destroyed, and it could be over 29 in total, or it could be a revised total there. Now, Chris Owicki talks about this attack, which Max24 had said, 29 units of enemy vehicles and 140 soldiers are taken out. So disastrous Russian attempts to mount armoured assaults are being blamed on commanders relying too much on electronic warfare equipment to defeat drones, while ignoring the need to ensure that it is updated with the current tactical threat library. In fact, there's a video yesterday of a vehicle. These Russians were like, yeah, check this out. It's got the latest electronic warfare stuff on. They took this vehicle out and it got blown up straight away. Or it got blown up, and the next video was of the vehicle burning. Anyway, back to Chris Owicki. Lamenting the destruction of dozens of armoured vehicles in failed assaults, such as the one shown above in the Zaporizhzhia region, the Zhizhov Telegram channel puts the blame on commanders who ignore or overlook the need to maintain electronic warfare systems mounted on vehicles. Quote, attacking in columns on sections of the front where the enemy has not switched off drone launch points and artillery is, in my opinion, criminal negligence. You can sacrifice as much as you want to Ares. He will not appreciate it. It's funny, but they sent infantry fighting vehicles and armoured personnel carriers into the attack, which even with additional protection are not suitable for even simple movement near the front line. At the same time, all the equipment was protected by nets and bars, as well as electronic warfare from a well-known manufacturer. That is, formally, everything was done wisely. Standard and custom protection equipment was installed. Electronic warfare equipment was also installed. So what could go wrong? Well, firstly, as I said above, it's long been impossible to use lightly armoured vehicles for offensive operations. Secondly, while the electronic warfare systems were developed, transferred to the troops and installed on equipment, 2 generations, a year, of drone evolution had already passed, and the electronic warfare systems became obsolete. Drones with variable and low frequencies, fibre optics, etc. appeared. How could this happen? I think it's all nauseatingly banal. Are the defence systems installed? Yes. Is the electronic warfare system installed? Yes. Go on the attack. Comrade General, the electronic warfare systems are obsolete. There are no others, and no one has rescinded the offensive missions. Go on the attack. In general, this is not the first and, I think, not the last case when the accumulated forces are wasted and the fighters are sacrificed to Ares. There are no high protection assault vehicles yet. They are too late, and even before the special military operation. The centralized supply of electronic warfare systems from one supplier takes too much time. Everything changes during this time, and the conclusions are also obvious. Refuse any heavy equipment except for tightly armored turtle tanks, and buy electronic warfare equipment promptly from various suppliers for the current situation at the front. It's really interesting. So it's saying, turtle tanks are the first thing that this channel goes to as far as being the best thing for an armored attack. So those tracked garden sheds, these are the vehicles that are lauded by the Russians. And then the most recent electronic warfare equipment, or make it locally in special battalions together with manufacturers, he finishes. And still, it would not be superfluous to punish at least for the loss of personnel, which is not covered by the achievement of the task. Maybe they would start using tactics. Obviously, translation issues aside, you get the point there. Wow. Okay. On the left bank of Kherson, soldiers of the 34th Separate Coastal Defense Brigade are hunting down Russians and hit them hard. 2 vehicles hidden in garages, a van, and other Russian positions destroyed. All destroyed there. Now, I've included this because this looks like it could be the Ukrainians fighting back. We've seen a lot of aviation being used in the Kherson region. So the Ukrainians are hammering the Russian positions on the left bank of the Dnipro. Remember, it goes left and right, goes in the direction of the river flows. The river flows north to south. So the left bank is actually on the right-hand side if you're looking at a north-south map. That is the Russian-controlled area. the left bank, and they are being hit with aviation. But as you can see as well, a number of drone hits. I think this has long been in the making. I would love to see Magyar's birds back down in the Kherson area, absolutely hammering the crap out of the Russians, who are giving the Ukrainians such a hard time. But of course, they are attacking predominantly civilians there, and I guess with limited resources, the military are seeking to defend the military and use their best drone units to advance military objectives. And sadly, Kherson probably is down the list of priorities, but it's good to see the Ukrainians are hitting back there, because that human safari taking place down in that area is really, really horrific. In fact, do I have it? There were, yes, this is up in Kursk. So a Ukrainian airstrike destroyed a Russian drone launch site at a factory facility in Kursk Oblast, killing up to 20 drone operators. That's the sort of thing you want to see down in Kherson as well. All over the front line, I guess. In a last operation, a Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter had struck the same site with a French-made high-precision AASM guided bomb. We might have seen that video as well. So up in Kursk, that is a high-value target being hit. Right, then we're going to go on to talk about this potential Saab 340 AWACS type plane that has supposedly been flying low over Lviv. Talked about this yesterday. Here's Visegrad saying, breaking news, Ukraine has received its first Saab 340 AEW&C airborne early warning and control aircraft. It's now flying over Lviv. Its radar can find targets more than 400 kilometers away and will help coordinate Ukraine's F-16s. Ukraine will soon receive a second such plane from Sweden too. That's what I was reporting yesterday. However, Max24 says the moment of the flight of AN-26 KPA from the 456th Transport Aviation Brigade over the Lviv region. This is probably the same aircraft that was confused with the Swedish Saab 340 AEW&C yesterday. What I would say is transport aircrafts probably don't do these kind of weird loops. It would make more sense that the loops were being done around Kyiv, that were being done around Lviv here, that were going off in 4 different directions at least, and then returning to the airport. Probably a result of something like, I don't know, it's more likely something like the AWACS plane, but it could also be a transport plane. I'd very much like it if the Ukrainians had received those, or at least the first of those 2 Swedish AWACS style planes. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. Here are the drone stats for the initial overnight wave of Russia's attack, says Tim White. So 54 drones were launched by Russia into Ukraine, so almost half of what was attacking Ukraine the night before. Much fewer than usual, says Tim White, and Ukraine's air defense reports 100% success rate. 38 were shot down, 16 fell safely, like electronic warfare and whatnot. They claim 100% success rate there. Russia did attack Ukraine in Odessa. 3 people were injured and a lot of damage was caused to the city. In Sumy region, a person was wounded and a home's damaged. Rescuers heard whimpering under the debris in one of the homes, and it was a little dog rescued safe and sound. So there were potentially strikes all in different places in Ukraine, but could well have been debris from shot down drones, given that the Ukrainians have claimed 100% interception rate. But Odessa was heavily attacked last night. Odessa was under a massive drone attack, said no reports at the time. Explosions and fires reporting across the city. In fact, this is an image that has come out. Can't really confirm it. It is quite blurred. Can't really tell exactly what's going on there, but it does indicate that there were large-scale fires in Odessa. No claims of deaths, though, which is good news. 3 injuries, but the aftermath of another sort of liberation attack there. And that has led Tim White to say stuff like, if we go back to Tim White, it might be under here. Some in Odessa are querying that all attack drones were shot down. As I reported last night, 3 people were injured and a lot of damage occurred during Russia's attack. Here's a video of the site of one area where debris fell. So there was that much damage in Odessa last night that people are saying, are you sure that this was just debris falling? But then these explosive drones do have massive payloads on them these days, and what goes up must come down, and anyone that is over Odessa getting blown up will cause just damage to Odessa. Russian aviation has dropped a guided glide bomb on a residential, which says residential house here, but this is an apartment block in Zaporizhzhia. Really horrific looking strike there. Hopefully there were no deaths involved in that one. There were 2 people wounded, according to Live UA map there. So aviation being used quite widely still, and often the evidence points to them slamming into apartment buildings and residential infrastructure. Now, yesterday there was, and I did claim this, I think yesterday in my hits and losses video, that Volgograd had been struck, the Volgograd hydroelectric power station. This is the area yesterday. Does look like a substantial fire. Another video from a different angle, more from Volgograd. So it could be that the hydroelectric power station there is under quite a bit of pressure, should we say. Again, it goes back to the idea that the Ukrainians hit most nights and we hear very little about what happens. But it doesn't mean that nothing is happening. The same could be said about last night. So I have absolutely no information of any strikes last night from the Ukrainians, or even from the Russians themselves. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. Some news about the Moskva. So if you remember the cruiser, the Moskva, the Russian flagship of their fleet, was sunk earlier in the war. 3 years on from the sinking of the Moskva, a leaked report indicates that the warship was in a, quote, deplorable condition when it left Sevastopol for the last time. Commentators suggest it may have had its radars wrongly painted with radio opaque paint. The video above shows the ship's departure from Sevastopol on 10th of April 2022, exactly 2 months earlier. On 10th of February, its captain Anton Valerievich Kuprin wrote a, quote, reference report on the status of the guided missile cruiser Moskva, which has been leaked. The report is among a set of materials on the ship and its sinking, which has also been collected by Dmitry Skrebets, the father of one of the sailors who died on the Moskva, which was a flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. He comments, quote, "We can conclude that the ship's performance, characteristics and systems were in a deplorable state, and not only could the flagship not take part in a special military operation with such problems, but even an ordinary exit to sea could be fraught with danger." Kuprin's report states that, quote, "The departments on board the ship were not prepared, they are dirty, not well maintained, the organisation of carrying out special duty was not being worked out, navigational equipment was either not working or only in limited use. The onboard S-300F Fort anti-aircraft missile system could not lock onto targets and had faulty components, as did the Corvette target designation system, which also had misaligned antennas. Similar faults affected many other weapons systems, including the ship's cannons. When the MR-800 radar system was operating, it jammed the R-7941 satellite communication system. The Radio Technical War Unit had a long list of technical failures. 2 of the ship's 4 turbo generators had exceeded their service life and had been arbitrarily life extended by 500 hours. A third was making strange noises, and a fourth was in such a poor condition that it was restricted for emergency use only. One of the main engines had a faulty cam clutch and was disconnected from the main shaft line, while the feed pipes of 2 of the auxiliary boiler units had been ruined by unrepaired corrosion. After the ship was hit by 2 Ukrainian missiles and was evacuated, the crew found that only a few of the inflatable lifeboats were in working order. Pre-packaged personal breathing devices were found to be inoperable due to missing components. The ship's condition seems to have been little improved since a NATO officer made a visit in 2012, the conclusions from which I reported in the thread below. So even then, NATO personnel said it was in bad condition. In addition, the Russian Telegram channel Sea Power of the State reports on rumors in the Russian Navy that the Moskva's radars had been painted with cheap anti-corrosion paint instead of the more expensive radar transparent paint that was supposed to be used. Quote, "The electronic reconnaissance station is used to detect radiation from the radar and seek aheads of enemy ships, aircraft and missiles. Therefore, specific requirements for radio transparency are imposed on the paint used for the antenna caps of this system." Let's look at the photo. Hull 011 of the Variag. You can see that caps are white. The second photo is Moskva, hull 121. From the stern, the photo is old, 2008. You can see the antenna caps are painted with some other paint, not the ball paint with which the entire ship is painted. Why? Because here's a more recent photo of the Moskva. And there you go. Everything is completely covered Of course, nothing can be said for sure, but this difference at the time raised questions among people involved in electronic reconnaissance. One of the components of many enamels, for example, glyphthalic or pentaphthalic enamels used to paint ship hulls above the waterline, include so-called secatives, substances that accelerate drying. Often these are metal salts. In turn, coatings for antenna fairings must be radio transparent, and the presence of metals and their derivatives, salts and oxides, in them is not allowed. For example, acrylic paints form radio transparent coatings. In other words, he's not going to be able to spot the missiles because he's got the wrong paint on the radio antenna, and that's going to cause problems. And then, it got sunk. So really, possibly reflective of the entire Navy, one might think, the Russian armed forces as a whole, but certainly an issue for the Moskva itself, and it ended up sinking. Right, Russian troops are apparently using Chinese-made Type 56-1 rifles, which are copies of the Soviet AKM with a folding stock. One of these rifles was captured by Ukrainian forces near Toretsk. It was brand new and oiled. In other words, this could be evidence for the Chinese supplying weapons to the Russian army. So that could be very much something in the limelight in the coming days. Zelensky had warned that there was some evidence to come out this week of Chinese weapons, or Chinese helping to supply Russia with lethal weaponry, and also the ability to manufacture their own weapons and munitions in Russia. Now, Japan has agreed apparently to provide satellite images to Ukrainian intelligence. I don't have any other information about this, and take it with a pinch of salt. Just a random OSINT source on Twitter, but that would be really good news if that is the case, as there will potentially be a huge gap in Ukraine's capabilities if the US really do take a step back from the war. And judging by the hints that we hear around the peace negotiations, it looks like that could happen. A recent BBC Verify investigation says the Institute for the Study of War highlights the scale of Russia's property seizures in occupied Mariupol. This is something that we've been hearing about over the last week or two. I haven't really reported on it, but the Russians are going really hard on seizing Ukrainian properties and then, giving them away and whatnot. Supporting Institute for the Study of War's assessment of how Russian occupation officials are using bureaucratic tools to exert control over occupied Ukraine. Those who are still, pro-Ukrainians inside occupied Ukraine under Russian rule must be having a really torrid time, as there are various measures that the Russians are using to exert pressure on those people, both in terms of kind of needing a Russian passport in order to access welfare, having apartments seized and all sorts of things. And some of these are indeed outright illegal. Well, probably all of them are outright illegal. Being forced to take on the identity of an invading nation, that is, I think, illegal. Having being forced to take on a passport in order to access services, not good. But of course, that's what liberation is for the Russians. Now, the Russian car market is facing a 50% drop in demand. A CEO warns the Russian demand for domestically made cars has dropped by about half. AvtoVAZ CEO Maxim Sokolov told journalists on April the 21st, underscoring the challenges of the Russian automotive industry. So it's in a lot of trouble. Right, let's go on to peace negotiations. So Trump has stated that he had good meetings with Russia and Ukraine and did not respond to a reporter's question about the US proposal for Ukraine to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. So skirting around the issues there, but saying, hey, we've had good meetings. There's a high chance, according to Trump, there's a high chance a Russia-Ukraine agreement happens this week. Recent US meetings on Ukraine and Iran were very good. More info in 3 days, says Trump. But no report says Joker Clown Trump says he'll drop a peace plan in 3 days. Spoiler, it might hand 20% of Ukraine to Russia de facto. And that's according to New York Post. And I discussed that yesterday. It also includes EU troops and peacekeepers babysitting a ceasefire run by Russia, Ukraine, and a non-NATO third party, China. What could possibly go wrong, he says. As someone says below, Putin himself could not have come up with a better deal for Russia. The Art of the Steal by Agent Krasnov. What's important is that Ukraine's partners tear this deal to shreds in front of the international media before Ukraine turns it down. He will not walk away claiming Ukraine and Europe don't want the deal. Trump failed abysmally. Any signing of a mineral reconstruction deal should be postponed until the end of the war is in sight, i.e. it won't be signed at all, and this is just an excuse not to sign it. The timing of turning down both deals is important for Ukraine, as the US military and intelligence aid is at stake. And that's a problem, is you annoy the Russians, the Americans too much, then they just walk away and you lose that really important capability. Steve Rosenberg, who reports on the Russian newspapers every day, working for the BBC, said in one of today's Russian papers, a Kremlin hawk, that's Nikolai Patrushev, who's a hugely important member of the Kremlin, known for his anti-Western rhetoric, has called for cooperation with America. What we learned from Nikolai Patrushev's interview in Kommersant, and he goes and looks at it in detail, but I won't go into that now. But that Patrushev is saying, yeah, we should work closely with the United States, shows how the United States has aligned itself with Russia. Indeed, we're hearing from the Kyiv Independent that the Kremlin has weighed offering Moscow skyscraper to Trump. So Trump's long been wanting a Trump Tower in Moscow. And of course, what a wonderfully useful tool, trading token that would be for Russia, according to media. So Russian officials have discussed the possibility of reviving plans for a Trump Tower in Moscow to entice US President Donald Trump to reset relations, according to the Moscow Times yesterday. And that's something that would absolutely play well with Donald Trump. Now, the Wall Street Journal, though, has a piece. Kyiv is on the clock to respond to Trump's plan to end the Ukraine conflict. US proposal includes recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea and blocking Ukraine from joining NATO, as we heard yesterday. The US has given an ultimatum to Ukraine: recognize Crimea as Russian, abandon any attempt to join NATO, and agree to a neutral zone around Zaporizhzhia to be managed by the US. Ukraine has until the London meeting tomorrow to respond. The proposal offers nothing to Ukraine. It's just a list of the things the US will take to Putin to see if he can be appeased. The complete collapse of the American security architecture could not have been more shameful. So that's Branislav Slanchev, really critical of the US approach to forcing Ukraine to give up this stuff. And then if Ukraine don't do that, then the US can get annoyed and say, right, it's your fault for dragging your heels. But they knew right from the beginning that that stuff was off the table. Ukraine couldn't have been clearer. It has been said over and over and over. Shashank Joshi says formally received, so he's from The Economist, quoting from the Wall Street Journal eventually, but he says formally ceding Crimea would be very difficult for Ukraine to swallow. But this is also notable, quote from the Wall Street Journal, the US is also not proposing a cap on Ukrainian forces and isn't precluding Western military support for Kyiv or the deployment of European troops there. So Shashank Joshi says two things to note. One, this US proposal is far short of the worst case outcomes. It's not gone completely maximalist Russia. It's just appeasing Russia quite a lot. Two, if it doesn't include an assurance of continued US aid, then the incentive for Ukraine to accept it and to cede Crimea in perpetuity is still limited. But yeah, I think this sets a really bad precedent. You know, as someone says below, Matt Steinglass here says, I think the precedent-setting impact of recognising the seizure of Crimea might be very bad. Perhaps less of it's couched in a deal in which Ukraine agrees to give up Crimea in exchange for XYZ. I mean, you start getting on to, you know, a situation where third-party nations, and particularly the US, are countenancing the stealing of sovereign territories or territories belonging to other sovereign nations by aggressive third parties. Like, yeah, you can invade and we'll just sign that off as being yours eventually just to get peace. Zelensky's office has responded, though, to rumours that the US might recognise Crimea as Russian. All negotiations, whether in Saudi Arabia or France, clearly state that Ukraine's territorial integrity is not up for discussion. So that's something they said right from the beginning. and that's been repeated by presidential advisor Serhiy Leshchenko. But of course, it doesn't stop the Americans putting that on the table. Zelensky said, quote, already on Wednesday, our representatives will work in London, Ukraine, UK, France, the US. We are ready to continue to move as constructively as possible to achieve an unconditional ceasefire with the subsequent provision of a real and lasting peace. So Ukraine seem to be up for it. The question is whether Russia is up for it as well. Okay, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching and getting your news about the Ukraine war from ATP Geopolitics. Please help out with the Easter Paisanki ATP Geopolitics campaign to provide vehicles to frontline troops, the Seraphims, and they're a striking drone company of the 104th Brigade, and also the Chimera unit of the Main Directorate of Intelligence. So though there are 16, vehicles, we're hoping to get them as well. Includes 2 pickups coming from ATP Geopolitics, but in general, I think there are some minivans, there's an ambulance, and the rest are trucks. I can't just trying to remember the total number. 16 pickups, that's it. 3 vans with 4x4 capabilities and a cargo van. So there you go. That's what it is actually. Please help out. It'd be fantastic. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak to you soon.